Welcome, everyone, to episode 30 of the Wombanhood Project podcast. We are going to wrap up Cesarean Awareness Month by debunking the top reason for cesarean section. Now, I'm curious, do you know the number one reason for C-sections in the world, in America, in your state, in your city? It is most likely something called failure to progress. So, let's go ahead and get into it. Just remember a quick disclaimer that our triggers are our own responsibility, and everything that I say on the podcast is my biased opinion. Nothing's medical advice, and take what resonates and leave the rest behind. So, let's do this. I think failure to progress is a slur. Yes, it is offensive. And I don't get offended in my gut when I hear it. It's a sickening term. And apparently it's been slowly fading away, but now they've changed it to arrested labor, as if arrested labor is any better. There's a few other terms here and there thrown around, but many people still use failure to progress, okay? It's a totally made up term by the medical system that has a cervix kink. All right. We're really raw and unfiltered here. And that's how I feel about it. Because we'll get into it. I got lots to say. Let me not get ahead of myself. But yeah, what is the definition by others? What do other people define failure to progress as other than a cervix kink? Okay. Failure to progress refers to when labor is not developing at a satisfactory rate. And it goes on to say, if your baby isn't born after 20 or more hours of contractions, you're most likely in prolonged labor. A satisfactory rate. What does this mean? So remember, this is the number one reason for C-sections. I did say this, right? This 1 in 3 births, over 30% of women are delivering their babies via C-section. And we have this cultural belief that C-sections are saving lives, which they do. But we have this cultural belief that that's why over 30%, why we're inching close to 40, 50%. It already is that in many places where C-sections is the normal birth. And we think it's because birth is so dangerous and there's all these emergencies happening. But the number one reason is this failure to progress. When labor is not developing at a satisfactory rate, okay? And remember, not always, but oftentimes, failure to progress is diagnosed by someone sticking their gloved fingers inside of your genitalia over and over and over again. For charting purposes. This was actually, I didn't even want to go into the history of it, but long story short, the reason we have this whole failure to progress and checking women's dilation to make sure that we're progressing at the right pace is some guy in the 50s. Apparently he's still alive. I thought he was probably long gone. He's apparently still publishing articles. And I don't even want to give the man credit because he doesn't deserve anything. He is he's not the only reason. Every person and everything plays a part in it. But some guy took 500 white women and under twilight sleep when they were all using forceps. Most of the births at the time when he was doing this cervical dilation, checking all this stuff, doing this study, these women were in twilight sleep. They had no autonomy. They had no agency over their body. And almost every single baby was pulled out with forceps and the woman was cut to their butt via episiotomy. So, moving on. Cervical exams mean literally nothing. It's cultural. A woman, you go survey women. Ask in a Facebook group. Go talk to a few ladies out there. You will find women that, because they were getting cervical checks, they were dilated at 5 centimeters for weeks before they went into labor. I'm talking some people are dilated for 4 weeks before they give birth. Like up to 5 centimeters, so maybe more. I've heard some crazy stories. But they still might not go into labor until 43 weeks. Now maybe because of the, quote, favorable cervix, possibly induction methods and things to get things going possibly could move faster. But natural labor going on its own could still take however long it's going to take. And on the flip side of that, a woman could go in, have a cervical exam at 38 weeks on the dot, and in 24 hours have her baby in her arms. And maybe she was like completely closed, no dilation at all. Now maybe that's more on the rare side. These might be on the opposite ends of the bell curve, right? But they're still normal. They're still happening. Okay? It means nothing. There's this term that your cervix isn't a crystal ball. I really get annoyed. I'm kind of like over that term, but it's true. It's like touching the cervix and swishing the fingers around is almost like rubbing the crystal ball. Like, what are you going to tell me? Tell me, cervix, what information can you give me? Nothing, ho? Nothing. Because it means nothing. So another thing they say about, like, another definition, they kind of call it like prolonged labor. It says prolonged labor, aka failure to progress, can be exhausting and emotionally draining, but rarely leads to complications. But then it goes on to say, just like I told you guys earlier, failure to progress is the primary indicator for an emergency cesarean delivery and delivery using instruments such as forceps or vacuum. But I thought it rarely led to complications. So was the cesarean actually an emergency? Because I looked up the definition of an emergency, and the definition I saw was, it said it's a serious, unexpected, and often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. Now, I'm curious, if you're listening to this and you were diagnosed with failure to progress, or you've heard stories and someone said, oh, I had an emergency C-section, or maybe you were told you had an emergency C-section, or I don't know, just think. How long was it from the time that they called C-section till the time you were till the time your baby was born? Because once you're in the operating room, it doesn't take long. So from the time the C-section was called, okay, like we're going to do a C-section, to the time your baby was born, how long did it take? Was it like 15 minutes? 20 minutes maybe? Or was it like 2 hours? Because most emergency cesareans, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, emergency cesareans are performed 1 to 2 hours after the decision is called. It is a complete oxymoron what they're using to classify as emergencies. They're literally not emergencies. Okay? So if we know that majority of cesareans are not actual emergencies like they're being classified, but also majority of cesareans derive from a failure to progress prognosis, then at that point, we know majority of people laying on an operating table every day, right now as we speak, are doing so for a completely unnecessary reason. I know I did. And imagine if we had like exploratory and false emergency surgeries for other physiological processes. And I hate comparing birth to like anything else. There's analogies you can make with aspects, with the processes, like having patience and, tapping into your intuition. But as far as the actual process, there's nothing else like it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I've sat here for years and tried to do the analogy. Someone on Instagram not long ago, I wonder if anyone listening remembers this. There was a girl that compared giving birth to like cooking pizza. But in a weird way, not like it's because I have a friend, Lizzie, who compared giving birth to baking cookies, and it was totally different. She compared it as in a risk factor. It was really weird. And I was like, dude, I can't even re-explain it to you because it didn't make any sense. Okay. But I've thought about it. I'm like, what if we had emergency surgeries, every time you had to poop? Or I had a friend on Instagram even post that. Imagine someone coming and sweeping and stretching your butt every time you had to poop. And I know that's vulgar and gross. Who wants to think about that? Although we poop a lot more than we give birth. I'm just saying, you see how silly it sounds? We have to be a little crazy to retract from the craziness that already makes zero freaking sense. So, if obviously most of the time it is completely safe, that it's not actually emergencies, that at that point we're just wanting to get it over with, right? And I say we as in just the population has this go. Why wait any longer? You can have your baby in your arms in 10 minutes. Let's go. Why wait? Why wait, right? But what happens if you wait? Like, people never ask that. Like, what happens if you just wait? What happens to your baby? What happens to you? Yolanda Clark actually talked recently about a birth where, I remember, it actually sounds pretty not fun to me. However, this baby was crowning for 9 hours. And she said she had a moment where after 8 hours or so, like not long before the baby was born, she thought to herself, what's happening? What's going on? And she, where is this baby? And she's like, she had to really have a come to Jesus moment. Like, why, what's the rush? What's going to happen? What's the rush? And that baby came out like an hour later, perfectly fine, super healthy, super pink, perfect. But the thing is, we actually never know what would happen. And the medical paradigm has reached a level where they attain to play God, and we try to control outcomes so much that we push things in the opposite direction. So we went from trying to control birth to, we've always had it wrong. They've always got it wrong with twilight sleep, with forceps, with all the things that they do via routine. It's not that epidurals are bad by nature. It's not that birthing in the hospital is bad by nature. It's that the routine invalidation of autonomy and overuse of all of these interventions are causing more harm. And so what they've said, we're doing all these things is to, help the stillborn rate and help cerebral palsy rates and all of these things that, we're trying to help babies is what they're saying. But we've actually not improved that at all. And now what's actually happening is maternal and neonatal mortality rates, infant mortality rates, they're all going up. And nothing has been improved. So the other thing you have to remember and you're not going to find, I'll bring up evidence here and there on the podcast, but I hate it. I don't even it's silly to me to an extent. I get it. I'm not invalidating all evidence. I like it. I seek it out when I need it to, but I don't look at it as my Bible. Okay. I don't look at a medical journal or a study as Jesus is P. I don't do that. A lot of people do. They really do, and I don't. So when you're looking at this evidence around failure to progress or any of these arbitrary falsehoods that obstetrics and the patriarchy has coined, okay? When you're looking or listening to failure to progress stories, you're more than likely recollecting a birth experience that occurred in captivity. And that might sound really out there. But this is an experience that most likely involved strangers' hands meddling in someone's birth portal. What they call your yoni. I've been really into that word lately. Your vagina. Someone strangers in your vagina during labor. That's what these stories have to include. These evidence, this research has to include that. Okay? There was probably lots of there was obviously lots of cervical checks, but there was probably lots of bright lights, beeping monitors, restrictions of the body, lack of movement, limited food and water intake, coercive and manipulative language, synthetic Pitocin, and any other drugs or things that try to pry open the cervix, like a Foley balloon or the prostaglandins. These are not inherently conducive to birth. It's not that actually, no, we're not even going to continue to go there. But yes, they're not inherently conducive to birth. And this all adds to the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And someone you may hear in the birth world, or something you may hear more often in the birth world, is actually the fear, tension, pain cycle, which ironically has the same acronym as failure to progress, FTP, fear, tension, pain, failure to progress. And we're not going to go into the fear, tension, pain cycle, but that is something you could look up if you want to understand that more as well. It all adds into why we are, quote, failing to progress. And the medical system sees a woman's body in labor as a machine. Something that if it's not operating at the exact standard they've set, it must be broken and they must fix it. And not only must they fix it, they must save you and your baby via this, quote, emergency that they curated. But the fact is that you're not a machine, and you're not just a patient or a room number or a insurance claim code. You are a living, breathing human being. You have thoughts, feelings, desires, motivations, perceptions, all on your own. And you literally have a full-on psyche. And if you don't know, like, your psyche is your energy field. And that itself is influenced by not only internal factors, such as your emotions, beliefs, and memories, but also external factors, right? Such as social, cultural, and environmental influences. All the things we just mentioned, right? The bright lights, strangers coming in your room, cervical exams, unwanted cervical exams, might I add. A lot of women don't want them. Stop acting like we all want them. And I'm not, who am I talking to? I don't know. People that say, well, most women want, no, we don't. No, that's called fawning. That's called fawning. So we are influenced. We are humans. Our uterus and our brains are connected. We can, take a breath. So unlike a robot or a machine, or a perfect little line graph showing progress of 1 centimeter an hour, birth requires space for your psyche to relax, to feel safe. You must feel safe. It requires patience. It requires respect. And not only that, for the sake of literal humanity, it absolutely needs sovereignty. And pretty much in any sovereign birth experience, you'll never see a woman, or you'll never know a woman's dilation. You won't know if she went from 1 centimeter to 10 centimeters within seconds. You won't know how effaced or soft or hard or long or short her cervix is. You won't be medically validated seeing her contraction pattern printed out on graph paper. There is no failure, and there is no expectations on progression from outside sources. If you don't know what sovereignty is, sovereignty actually refers to the supreme authority or power to govern oneself, and make decisions without external interference. Now, in my biased opinion, I'm willing to admit that. I have my own experiences I'm speaking from. You cannot experience sovereignty and trust that you will make a fully autonomous decision while being pressured during the most highly intense and emotionally vulnerable state of your life. How can you do that with people, multiple people, asking to invade your genitals every 2 hours? Or every 2 weeks at an appointment, or every week? How can you do that when someone's fingers are what's dictating your progress or your failure? In air quotes, by the way. You can't. You cannot. I don't see how you can do that. Even if you trust your provider, even if you say, okay, I just want to know. I'm asking you to do this cervical check. I want to know. I am going to challenge you. Why? Ask yourself, am I doing it for me? What is it going to tell me? It really tells you nothing, like we've said before. But are you doing it for them? And I think sometimes it really takes asking yourself that a handful of times and processing maybe your past birth experience a handful of times to think, wow, did I really want that? Did I? It's a good thing to ask. Failure to progress, often used to justify medical interventions, stems from a patriarchal medical model that prioritizes control over women's bodies. It reflects the notion that our bodies must adhere to rigid timelines and false standards. It reinforces paternalistic ideas of obedience, compliance, and the need of constant surveillance and intervention. It serves to reinforce power dynamics that prioritize medical professionals' quote, expertise over women's lived experience. Failure to progress literally reinstates the inherent distrust of women's autonomy and intuition. And so if you've been told that you failed to progress, I want you to take a moment to reframe that narrative. Instead of internalizing it as a personal failure, recognize it as a failure of the patriarchal medical system to acknowledge the complexity and sovereignty of the birthing experience. We live in a world where birth is so over-medicalized. It is controlled. Every action, every choice around what we do in birth is scrutinized. And honestly, reclaiming your power and autonomy is really an act of resistance. It's saying no to a system that seeks to diminish your agency and intuition. And it's actually saying yes to the wisdom and strength that's inherent within you. And beautiful souls, I want you to remember that you're not alone. You are powerful, you are sovereign, and your voice matters. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, continue to reclaim the power of your womb and shine brightly in your truth. This is Lizzie Morris, signing off, sending you love, light, and liberation. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode on failure to progress and why it's BS. If you want to give me your thoughts on this episode, make sure you screenshot this, tag me in your stories at the Lizzie Morris on Instagram. You can also tag the podcast page, the Wombanhood Project, spelled the exact same as it is here. Let me know what you thought about it. And if you want to hear more, we do podcast launches every Friday. There's a new episode. So subscribe to the show. Find your favorite podcast platform, subscribe, and go leave a 5-star review. We will be doing reviewers of the show as soon as we get some more coming in. And yeah, all the social medias, different resources, links, whatever will be in the show notes. So go check it out. All right, guys, see you next time. Bye.